Hey, church family, I wanted to take this opportunity to present you with another word of encouragement as we prayerfully prepare for 2021. Well, after today, we only have 3 days left to round out this extremely difficult year. And while it's easy for us here in the U.S. to focus all of our attention on the issues that affect us here in America, it's important for us to remember that there's coming a day when the fullness of the Gentiles will come to an end. And it's at that point in time when the end of the church age will then give way to the 70th week of Daniel, which we find detailed in the 9th chapter of his book. With that being the case, it's important for every Christian to pay attention to what's happening in Israel. If you want to know what's happening on God's calendar, we ought to pay attention to Israel. And listen, the Israeli government just collapsed last Wednesday, December the 24th, after their parliament failed to meet the deadline to pass the 2021 budget. This collapse, it's actually triggered the country's fourth election in just 2 years. And while Benjamin Netanyahu is going to remain prime minister until a new government is formed in March, the fact is, Israel could end up with a brand new prime minister in just a matter of months. With that being the case, I can't help but to wonder, how is this going to affect the Abraham Accords? Remember, the Abraham Accords, this is a bit of a peace agreement that President Trump is brokering between Netanyahu and the foreign ministers from the United Arab Emirates as well as Bahrain. And so we have to ask, will President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu continue to help create peace in the Middle East come March? Or will it be Joe Biden working together with another Israeli prime minister? And if so, then how will the Lord use those leaders to prepare Israel for the rise of the Antichrist and for the second coming of Jesus Christ? It's difficult to say. We can't say what's going to happen at this point in time, but God knows. It's possible, though, that new leaders will use failed old policies, and this might end up pushing Israel into a corner, and this might force their hand so that they stop looking to the U.S. for protection and permission. And it might be that they rise up and secure their own peace by pushing their enemies back so that they can dwell in a land without walls. It might be that we're already seeing this put into motion even as we speak. You might not know this, but the Israeli Defense Force has continued to target Iranian military compounds which are located there just to their north in Syria. And the reason why is because the Iranian Quds Force has been using strategic locations of Syrian soil to launch many attacks against the nation of Israel over the last several years. For example, it was February the 10th, 2018, when the Iranians used their Syrian compound to invade Israeli airspace with an unmanned aerial vehicle. In response, the Israeli Defense Force, they struck that UAV launch site, as well as 12 Iranian and Syrian targets, which were located right there in Syria. Then on May 9th, 2018, the Iranian Quds Force, they fired approximately 20 rockets into Israel from Syria. And in response, the IDF carried out strikes on dozens of military targets in Syria, which are occupied by the Iranian Quds Force. This included Iranian intelligence sites as well as logistics headquarters. It was January the 20th, 2019, when the Iranian Quds Force, they fired a rocket at a civilian ski resort in northern Israel from their Syrian soil. According to the reports, it was the incredible Iron Dome aerial defense system there in Israel that successfully intercepted the rocket before it was able to strike the intended target. And then, in further response, the IDF struck Iranian Quds Force targets in Syria, which included munition storage sites and a military compound which is located there in Damascus. On August the 24th, 2019, the Iranian Quds Force in Syria, they were preparing to attack Israel with multiple killer drones. Thankfully, that drone attack, which was being led by Qasem Soleimani, was preemptively foiled by the IDF. And oddly enough, Soleimani was then killed by an American Reaper drone just 4 months later. The Iranian Quds Force also fired a number of rockets from Syria at Israel on September the 9th, 2019, and once again, November the 19th, 2019. Without debate, Iran has been waging a war with Israel, and they're using Syrian soil as the launch pad. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised by Israel's decisions to attack every Iranian military compound which is located there in Syria. For example, it was October the 21st, just a few months ago. Israel attacked the Iranian militia, which is located in southern Syria. It was November the 17th when Israel launched its largest military strike in years against Syria And they did this shortly after receiving a report about Iran's significant stockpile of nuclear material, which they're keeping there in Syria. And it was Christmas Day when Israel launched airstrikes against Iranian military targets there in Syria, killing 6 people. Now, as we consider all of these airstrikes, I can't help but to wonder what's going to happen in March. You know, as the state of Israel prepares to elect an entirely new government, what's going to happen? How is the Lord going to use all of this to accomplish his perfect plan? Will this result in the fullness of the Gentiles, which I believe is going to happen at the time of the rapture of the church? I wish I had more answers than questions, but I don't. What I can say for certain is this: the God of Israel is seated upon the throne, and he has promised to work all of these things together for the good of those who love him and those who are called according to his purpose. And so as we continue to watch all of these pieces being put in place, which will culminate in the rise of the Antichrist, followed by the second coming of Jesus Christ, I just encourage you to remember that the true followers of Jesus Christ have been called to continue fighting the good fight of faith, all for the glory of God.